Good morning. Before we introduce our speaker this morning, I've been asked to read Matthew chapter 9. Matthew chapter 9, verses 2 through 8 from the ESV. Matthew 9. And behold, some people brought to him a paralytic lying on a bed. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Take heart, my son, your sins are forgiven." And behold, some of the scribes said to themselves, "This man is blaspheming." But Jesus, knowing their thoughts, said, Why do you think evil in your hearts? For which is easier to say, your sins are forgiven, or to say, rise and walk? That you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. He then said to the paralytic, Rise, pick up your bed, and go home. And he rose and went home. And when the crowd saw it, they were afraid. And they glorified God, who had given such authority to men. What kind of man would sell a Volkswagen bus for a second-hand motorcycle, modify it with an extra gas tank, a tent, and a machete, and then proceed to ride it all the way from Wasilla, Alaska to Lubbock, Texas, a total of 3,723 miles, all by himself? Similarly to the Apostle Paul, in danger perhaps not of shipwreck, but in danger of bear attacks, flat tires, cold, lonely nights, in peril of 18-wheelers, buffalo herds, and bandits. What kind of man? A man who loved God more than life. A man who is passionate about people knowing Jesus. A man who is wise beyond his years. A man who is a self-professed nerd who opens doors, automatic doors, with the wave of his hand. A man who is a dedicated servant, kind, faithful of the King. A man who is my friend and my brother, Mike Katkus. Mike is from Wasilla, Alaska, and he came through AIM in 2007 and then served his AIM time in Port Elizabeth, South Africa, after which he returned to attend and to graduate from SIBI while working on the AIM staff for about 4 years. He and Annie were married July 6th of 2013 right here in this building. I know that because I was here and I had the honor of officiating that ceremony. Currently, they are missionaries back in Alaska, where they, among many things, coordinate an AIM team. They're first. You can see up there, David and Jordan. And they also work with churches in the Central Valley to help encourage, unite, and to teach and to love the good people of God and to bring others into that relationship as well, of which Mike will speak more about in just a moment. Mike, would you like to introduce your sweet wife and family members who are with you this morning?
Yeah. This is my super awesome wife, Annie, and this is my in-laws, Roger and Brenda, and we're very happy to be here this morning.
Glad you're with us this morning. When I asked a few people, including my own children, about Mike, here's what I heard. Mike loves people. I mean, he really loves people. Mike is the kind of guy that when he's speaking to you, you feel like you're the most important person in the world. Mike is the real deal. Mike and Annie's passion is unparalleled. It's contagious. Mike is a loyal, faithful friend, a lover of people and of God's word, of his sweet wife, and of life. Mike is a good brother. Mike is a good mentor. Mike is a good representation of Jesus. And Mike, my brother, my friend, this morning I'm delighted for you to be here and to share what God is doing through you and your sweet wife in Alaska, and we invite you this morning to come to preach the word.
Wow. Good morning. It's a joy to be back here. It is a special place. I couldn't help but think that if you ever use tools for a long enough time, you get certain worn parts on the handle. And I feel like that about this place, where God has used this place so much that there's almost like an imprint here. There's like a wornness because God has used this place for decades to send people out into the harvest. And I'm very thankful to have been one of those workers to have come from here. Thank you, Pat, for that introduction. And it does my heart great joy, or gives my heart great joy to be here and to be back amongst you. This morning I want to talk about the work in Alaska, what's going on up there, as well as how you can participate in the work there. But I also want to talk about how we ended up in Alaska. And so, like Pat mentioned, in 2007, I came down to Camp Adventure unwillingly. My parents forced me to go. I did not want to go to Camp Adventure. I did not want to check out this AIM program. I was already ready to go to college in Arizona, but my parents really wanted me to go check out this Adventures and Missions program. And throughout the whole week, I was just really obstinate and not wanting to be there. But on the last day of Camp Adventure, I started to think, okay, what would Jesus do, right? That's kind of a go-to phrase, at least it was for me at the time. What would Jesus do? And I answered that question with, well, Jesus would be faithful no matter where he went. He would be awesome, and he would be Jesus, whether he went to college, whether he went to the AIM program, no matter what, he would be Jesus. But then I asked myself, what would Satan want me to do? Would Satan want me to go to this party school that I was planning to go to in Arizona with no family, no friends, no accountability, fresh out of high school? Or would Satan want me to go to this missionary program, learn about God, learn how to help people, learn about mission work? And once I laid it out that way, it became really obvious which path I needed to choose. So I decided to go to AIM. And I didn't want to flake out of making that decision, so when I came back from Camp Adventure, I did what I thought was the smartest thing to do. I got a tattoo. And I got a tattoo on my arm to make a permanent decision. Like, I'm going into this. And so I looked through my Bible, and I found a verse I thought was applying or applicable, and I got Luke 1:37 tattooed on my shoulder here, which says, with God, nothing is impossible. Because I had no idea what I was really getting into, and I had no idea really what was going to be happening. But I knew I'd be going with God, and therefore it would be good. But now looking back, I find it as a sign of, at least for me, humility, because that verse, Luke 1:37, is the context surrounding that passage is when Mary is talking to Gabriel saying, how can I be pregnant when I have not known a man? And Gabriel says, with God, nothing is impossible. And so that's a beautiful truth. And there's other passages that say that. But it helps remind me that, man, I have grown a lot since then, and I still have a lot more to grow. And so that was the beginning of this journey, and so it reminds me and humbles me a lot. So I went into the AIM program, and I learned so much, and I'm only going to share a tip of the iceberg of some of the things that I learned in the Adventures and Missions program. The first thing that I want to talk about is I ended up getting sent to South Africa, which, just so you know, my top 5 places that I wrote down on my list were Russia, Albania, Brazil, Honduras, and Mexico. So South Africa wasn't even on my list, but yet I ended up getting sent there, and I can't imagine a better place for me to have gone to and to grow more and to thrive more. So lo and behold, God knows what he's doing, and he's working and moving things in a way that we don't even realize. And so that was a great lesson. But the 3 that I really want to share with you, first of all, is something an AIM assistant told me before going to South Africa. And he said, Mike, if you come back from your field closer to God than when you left, your whole field time was a success. And that really helped put things into perspective, that all the studies, all the baptisms, all the relationships, all the adventures and experience, all that is just icing on the top if I'm drawing closer to God. And that was just a huge relief off of my shoulders, but also that's something true for missionaries and preachers, I think, all throughout the world, that if we are seeking first his kingdom and his righteousness, everything else falls into place. And so that was a major lesson that I wanted to share about that I learned through the AIM program. The second one is mission priorities. When I was working with Ken and Judy Kendallball in South Africa there in Port Elizabeth, we were out for coffee one day and some mentor time with with our coordinators there. And Ken, when I were sitting there talking with my other teammate Tyler, and a South African walked by outside the coffee shop, and he said, "Mike, you know what? Me preaching the gospel to that man is not my number one priority." I just kind of looked at him. It's like, what? You're a missionary. How is telling that man the gospel not your number one priority? And I was just blown away that he even said that. Well, then he turned to me and he said, "Because, Mike, you could go preach the gospel to him. Your teammate could go preach the gospel to him. But only I can be the husband to my wife. Only I can be the father to my children." And that is a mission field that's exclusively responsible to him, or that he's responsible to. And so understanding that I am not to sacrifice my marriage at the expense of the immediate work that somebody else could be doing. And so having that priority really helped me understand the mission. While we were also in South Africa, our coordinators had us write out a list of all the things we're looking for in our spouse, future spouse. And so I was thorough. I wrote a list of all the qualities I was looking for in a spouse, and I wrote 2 pages, front and back, super specific. And as I'm very critically writing all these attributes, my teammate looks over, one of our girl teammates looks over at this list I'm writing. She's like, "Wow, Mike, that's quite a list." I was like, "I know," as I'm continuing to write. And then she's like, "Well, let me ask you a question." I was like, "Okay." And she says, "Tell me, what type of man would that woman marry, and are you that man?" And it took me a while to contemplate that, and then reality set in that no way. I do not, the woman I am describing would not want to be with Mike at that time. And so it made me really strive to be the person that I'm looking for is looking for. And so it took me several years of working on stuff in my own life and trying to grow. And lo and behold, God has blessed me with someone that met not just everything on that list, but far exceedingly in Annie. And so that was a major lesson we learned in AIM, is that we are to be trying to be the person that we're looking for is looking for. Well, after going through the AIM program and graduating from it, I ended up going to SIBI. I came down here to go through the school as well as to be an AIM assistant, and again, learned so much. And I want to share something. Lauren Hollingsworth, he's a missionary in Thailand. He's been there for over 40 years, and he's become a very important mentor to me and to Annie as well. And he's a graduate from the school here as well, way back in the day. He told me, as I was getting ready on my motorcycle to go down here, he said, "Mike, there's 3 different ways you can learn at Sunset." He said, "You can learn just to get a good grade." He said, "You can learn to understand what you're studying." But he said, "Don't do those. Do this." He said, "Learn to the point where you can teach it." And the reason why that is so important is because the stuff y'all are studying that we studied isn't just for our own intellectual benefit. It isn't for our own spiritual benefit. It's to be implemented into every conversation we have for the rest of our lives. And so what we study here is to help other people. And so we need to learn this stuff to the point where we can teach it and share it with others. And to have that mentality and intensity here in your studies, because I'm sure you got just as itchy as I was with wanting to get back to the mission field or get out into the field from this place. But you need to understand that the things that you're learning here are for the field. And the things that you are learning and being invested in yourself will affect your mission field when you leave here. And so come here with the intention to learn to the point of teaching. So I came from a non-denominational Christian school, like high school and middle school. My family attended the Church of Christ in Alaska. But I went to this school that there's tons of people from different denominations. And ever since then, there's this spectrum of liberalism and legalism that just seems to always be expanding as I travel and teach and connect with people. And I've noticed I've noticed that in my high school, at least, and even studying with some denominational leaders since then, when they hear that I'm affiliated with the Church of Christ, they say, oh, that's the group that doesn't use instruments and is all about baptism, right? And as important as those doctrines are, wouldn't it be more noble if they said, oh, the Church of Christ, that's the group that really loves each other. That's the group that really loves the Lord, that really knows Scripture. I mean, as important as instruments and baptism is, aren't there more noble things to be known for to the world? Romans chapter 10, verses 1 through 3, Paul's talking, he says, brothers, my heart's desire and prayer to God for them, talking about the Israelites, is that they may be saved. So they're not saved. For I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. For being ignorant of the righteousness of God and seeking to establish their own, they did not submit to God's righteousness. And so what I've noticed is that legalism and liberalism are both coming from the same problem. They're both trying to establish their own righteousness. And so what I've realized and I'm trying to share in Alaska is for us not to pursue anything else but the righteousness of God. I went through this phase of my life when I was in high school where I thought the Church of Christ was just really a bunch of stick in the muds, narrow-minded, and just quenching the Spirit. And I was just kind of really wrestling with that. But I have fallen in love with the spirit of, what does the Bible say? What did Jesus teach? And let's pursue that. And I have just fallen in love with that spirit, of that Berean spirit of searching the Scriptures. And that's what we need to be doing, is submitting to the righteousness of God and not trying to establish our own standard of righteousness. But we must be pursuing and submitting to the very righteousness of God and not trying to substitute that for anything else. So that's something I began to see more and more here, and something I'm continuing to grow in as well. When I was in South Africa, I had a mohawk, and I didn't wear shoes for like 8 months, and wore shorts all the time, and preach, not wearing shoes and wearing shorts. And when I came back to Alaska, they have a big group gathering of the lectureship where Christians gather all around, and they asked me to lead some singing. And this was like the first week I got back, was up there, and they asked me to lead some singing. I was like, sure, I'd love to serve, help. And then they said, well, can you put some pants on, please? And this was like a big reverse culture shock moment, because like, what? Like, my shins need to be covered to help lead singing? Like, that doesn't make any sense. But I then thought, if I'm willing to have a mohawk and to not wear shoes to connect with people in South Africa, can't I wear pants to connect to people in Alaska? If I'm going to be all things to all men, doesn't that include being all things to those that are more conservative or legalistic? Doesn't that mean meeting them where they're at? I think if Timothy, who got circumcised to help connect to the Jews, if he's willing to go through that permanent, painful decision to help connect to the Jews, even though he didn't need to do it, he did it so that he could reach them. As a young person, shouldn't I be willing to meet an older generation where they're at, instead of just writing them off and saying, well, they're just old school, let them do their thing, they'll die out, whatever. Like, is that really the right attitude to have? If we're to be all things to all people, that includes those back here on this side of the pond, and to have that mentality, that mission mindset back on in this culture. So the passage that Pat read is important because in Alaska, there's one area code for the phones in Alaska, and it's a 907. And it's silly, but 907 is like a big deal in Alaska where people get tattoos of it. It's like bumper stickers, 907 Pride. It's just, the number is everywhere. So while I was here in Sunset, I didn't know what Annie and I were going to do after I graduated here. And the passage here in Matthew chapter 9 and verse 7 hit home so hard for me while I was here. I was at a coffee shop. It was at J&B Coffee, I remember. And I was doing my personal Bible reading. I was reading Matthew chapter 9, and it's the story, or this moment where Jesus heals this man. And then in verse 7, Jesus tells him, pick up your bed, go home. And it hit me so hard because going through AIM, going through Sunset, I had been healed in a lot of ways. There had been parts of me that were broken, and I had learned a lot, and I had been healed, and now, right, take up your bed and go home. 907, which is Alaska's number, and so I thought, I need to start praying about going back to Alaska and working with the churches up there. So I went to the Advanced Missions Program, and we came up with a plan to return back to my home culture, which I'd never been an adult in, honestly. And we came up with the Nehemiah model. And if you remember, Nehemiah was away from his home, but he heard about the condition of things back in Jerusalem, and it broke his heart. And he prayed about it, and he goes before the king, and he gathers resources. And then he returns to Jerusalem. And then instead of going in guns a-blazing, knowing exactly what everything needs to be done, he takes a time by himself to go walk around the walls at night to see the strengths and weaknesses of those walls, and then starts to mobilize everyone to rebuild the city to the way that it's supposed to be. And we use that model for our mission work up there, where our first several months before going there was gathering resources. The first year and a half in Alaska was learning the culture and learning the strengths and weaknesses in the churches throughout Alaska. And then this last year and a half has been focusing on rebuilding the walls. And it has been an extremely exciting time. That's why I want to spend the rest of this time talking about is this most fruitful year of 2017 of building the spiritual walls of the churches in Alaska. And it started with this beginning of this year. I went to see Lauren, the one who told me the 3 ways to come to Sunset. Him and his wife Penny are missionaries in Thailand. And in January, me and a brother in the church went over there to spend time with him and to learn from him and his wife and their experiences. And while we were there, we realized that there is this core that is the church. And then culture kind of gets molded around this core that is the church. And that culture isn't necessarily bad, but going to Thailand helped us to discern the core from culture. And so there's this beautiful blueprint to the core, and part of that blueprint in that core is the unity that is required for the church to function. This picture here, this is 2 skulls of some bull moose in Alaska. And this is in Denali National Park. And these moose were in conflict, and their antlers got interlocked from their conflict, and they couldn't get them unstuck, so that they starved and died because they could not resolve this conflict. And I saw these moose skulls in Alaska this last year, and it broke my heart because, man, when in the church, when there's unresolved conflict, when there's disunity, there's death. Something beautiful about the churches in Alaska is that there's about 17 congregations in the whole state, and just about all of them are in unity, are in fellowship with one another, and are involved in each other's lives. And we're trying to fan that flame more, that the churches need to be unified, that the congregations of the churches of Christ need to be brothers and sisters, not just isolated from each other. John 17, verses 20 through 21, Jesus is praying. He says, I do not ask for these only, talking about the apostles, but also those who will believe in me through their word, which is you and me. And he says that they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me and I am you, that they may also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. So the unity between brothers and sisters in the church and unity between us and God makes the gospel believable. It makes the world recognize that Jesus isn't just another man, but he was sent from God. And so the unity of the church needs to be the foundation of our evangelism, and we're proclaiming a gospel of peace and reconciliation. And if we can't have peace and reconciliation with the people that are in the same room with us or the people in the other town from us, then how can we preach that with confidence? So something we've been really focusing on is the Jesus blueprint, trying to follow the pattern, trying to understand that Jesus has a specific design for his church. And we're trying to be that. We're trying to follow that design. and talking about rebuilding the walls, there's a lot of strengths in the churches in Alaska, and there's also some major weaknesses or some major holes. And one of those is the roles of preachers and elders. And so we spent a lot of time this year trying to help preachers and elders understand their role in the congregation. I know that might sound kind of strange or boring, but it's really, really important because elders are not businessmen. They are to be shepherds, and they're supposed to smell like sheep. And preachers are not elders. And we see so often this pattern that we sometimes fall into, where you see preachers doing the work of elders, elders doing the work of deacons, and deacons and members not even knowing what they're supposed to be doing. And so trying to help preachers and elders understand their specific roles that we see in Scripture and helping them pursue those and not at the expense of doing other good things. And we're also trying to help individual Christians understand that Christ has an expectation for how we are to live our lives. We, in our pursuit of unifying the churches in Alaska, we are trying to help the preachers of the church be together more often and to encourage one another. The two things that kill preachers and missionaries most is sin and burnout. And so helping preachers and their wives have connection and accountability and friendship and mentorship is extremely important. And again, the congregations are to be autonomous from each other, but they're not to be isolated. You look at the New Testament church, and they are all aware of what's happening, where there's a famine or a crisis or a persecution, and the letters are being passed around, resources are being passed around to bless and to help and to be involved in each other's lives. So we completely promote autonomy with the congregations. You don't have some congregation shepherding another one or telling another one what to do, but there's one church. There's one body, and so we're trying to always fan that flame. Like Pat mentioned, we have an AIM team now up there, and that's been really exciting, and we're really looking forward to potentially having another one, Lord willing, but having Jordan and David up there with us has been awesome for a myriad of reasons. When you have young people that are willing to say, here I am, send me. I don't have a lot of life experience, but I'm willing to jump in and try to be faithful. That's a pretty contagious perspective to have. And when people have been Christians for decades see, wow, that 19-year-old is stepping out there in faith. If he can do it, I can do it. And there's some momentum that gets built from that. And so also, we're trying to help them learn not how to succeed in a program, but learn that they are part of a kingdom and that this is not something that's just a 2-year-long process, but we're trying to help these young people be faithful for life. And, AIM was a huge stepping stone in my spiritual walk, but it was just one stone in a very long journey. And trying to help these two young men understand that and live that has been awesome, and they're doing great. Like I mentioned, there's this yearly event called the Lectureship where all the Christians in Alaska come together, and it's called the Alaska State Lectureship. We had about 600 people come together this year, and it was just amazing to see the unity of the churches coming together, and it really is a special, unique thing. Can you imagine in Texas all the churches getting together? I mean, can you imagine every congregation being represented in a unifying event? It's a pretty special thing what's happening up there. Something that Alaskan culture, or at least in the ministry up there, was really struggling with was young adult ministry. There was no rite of passage from being a child to being an adult. It's not like, okay, you are a man now. There wasn't anything like that. And so we're trying to, again, just like with the Aimers, help these young people transition from being part of a youth group to understanding you're a Christian adult and how can you be faithful for life. And we're trying to stop the event-based faith, where you go to this youth group event, you go to the summer camp, you go to this rally, you go on this trip, and then when you get out of that, you're like, okay, well, now what? How are you equipped to serve God by yourself for the rest of your life? We're trying to really minister to that. And we're trying to create a safe and spiritual atmosphere for them to grow. And also, another major problem was that Christians were marrying people outside of the church. and that was really becoming a tax to the faith, and people were falling away. And so we're not trying to be like Christian Mingle or anything. We're not trying to like matchmake everybody. But if we create a place where young Christians can meet other young Christians, that's awesome. God made marriage. It's a cool thing. It's not mandatory, but it can happen. We want to create a safe atmosphere for it to happen. And and it's been awesome so far. Small groups have been super effective in Alaska. And we started out with just 3 couples, and now we're over 30 plus in 2 different groups, and we're seeing that to be super effective with reaching people in the Alaskan culture. Something really special, again, about working with the churches in Alaska is there's this thing called Midnight Sun Bible Camp. And it's a Bible camp for Christians throughout the whole state. And so the people that staff the camp are Christians throughout all of Alaska. So by going to this camp, you get to get connected with your brothers and sisters in the whole state. And so the Amers, we had come out and work with us the whole time, or the whole camp. And just from working 3 weeks in a row out there, they now have brothers and sisters that they are connected to in all of Alaska. So we travel around Alaska, and they already have friendships and relationships in the whole place. So it's a pretty special deal. And we're also focusing on teaching and counseling the Alaskan youth. When we went to Thailand, Lauren had been there for over 40 years and still spends 6 months out of the year over there. And I asked him, what's something you wish you could have done better? What's something you feel like you missed out on in your over 40 years in Thailand? And he said, I wish I had invested more time in the youth, because before you know it, they are adults. And I could have started working with them way earlier. And so I took that to heart to want us to spend more time working with the next generation. Just yesterday, my father-in-law doesn't know I'm going to tell this story, but just yesterday, they were giving some shots to some sheep that they have. And there was one sheep that my in-laws had been bottle feeding, but the rest are kind of a little bit more wild. And the one that was bottle fed, when he was needing to bring them up to weigh it and to give it the shot, it was so much more docile. It was so much easier to work with and manage. It wasn't scampering and freaking out and trying to panic, because from birth they had been working with it. And I thought about, shepherds working with sheep, the dynamic of the church. If we start working with younger people earlier, that really equips them to then be part of a congregation in a more functional, or at least in a more natural manner. And so there's a lot of reward to have in investing in the youth. And so that's what we're trying to do. Also, that junior week was about middle schoolers' age. We also work with the high school group, and that's been really, really awesome. I'm now in charge of the camp for senior week this next year, so we're really excited about that. And we're going to try to make it more missional. Like I was saying earlier, instead of just being a really fun spiritual week, we're going to make it fun, spiritual, but with a focus on trying to equip these young people to be faithful for life. We've had growth in this way. We've had people baptized out this camp, and it's exciting to see that God is reaching the youth of Alaska and that we're investing in the next generation. Something we also learned from Thailand is that it's so important for the church to be fellowshipping outside of the Sunday assembly. It is so important for the church to be together throughout the week. My good friend Steve, he was the one that came with me to Thailand. He has about 4 acres down the Kenai Peninsula in Alaska, and there's 2 churches of Christ about 30 minutes apart from each other, and they've done this multiple times this year where they invite families from both congregations and also families in the community to come tent camp out on their property, and they cook together and they sing and have devos and have games, and it's just we call it Camp Cannon because their last name is Cannon, and it's been awesome. And it's John 17 happening, where the world sees the unity of Christians and says, okay, there's something special about these people. There's something unique about this group. And the unity of Christians makes the gospel believable. And it's happening, and it's exciting. So this is really exciting. This is the good stuff. This is what I wanted to share with you most this morning, is that Alaska needs more preachers and missionaries. These blue hearts I have up here, these are the congregations right now that have a preacher or missionary there. These are all the congregations. But these next 5 I'm going to show you, they're congregations that no longer have a preacher or missionary present. And following the design of the church, they need leadership. They need somebody there. And so we have a congregation down here in Sitka. We have a congregation up north here in Fairbanks, where I believe where's Chris? Ham? Is Ham here this morning? I saw him earlier. He's from there, one of you guys. And then down here in Valdez, in Eagle River, and in Seward, Alaska. These 5 stars here, they need preachers. They need missionaries. And the dream is that you could be that you could fill these areas, these voids where there needs on the ground leadership. Because Annie and I travel around almost all these places, but we can't be everywhere at once, and that's not the design of the church. There needs to be somebody on the ground there. And then you could then join this network of preachers and churches to join this league of extraordinary gentlemen and their wives as well. There's a special thing happening in Alaska. The churches are unified. They're lights to the world, and we want to talk to you guys about coming up to work in Alaska. And so we need preachers and missionaries, and we want you to consider to come up to work with us, whether that's coming up for a 2 to 12 week time in the summer where you come work at the camp with us, and then we get to travel around for a few weeks to show you some of these places that you could work at, and to also meet some of the leadership in Alaska that you could partner with. Or you can come for a 12-month survey trip, where you guys, when you finish your school here, you ask your supporters to support you for 1 more year, to gather experience, to go to the mission field, and then to travel throughout Alaska to visit these congregations that are in need of preachers or missionaries, that you then could see, okay, I could thrive here. I could be of service here for a year, and then maybe 2 years, 3 years, but come and for at least 2 to 12 weeks, or even better, for 12 months, because the church in Alaska is growing, but the field is white to harvest. They're going to have a picture of like the snow and make a joke about it's white unto harvest, but I was like, that'll be cheesy. I'm not going to do that. But there's so much work to be done in Alaska. It's such a unique place. And I can't come up with a word for it because I don't think it exists, where it's like domestic and foreign at the same time. So it's like intermestic, or like Doran or fomestic. I can't think of a good word for it. But it's part of the United States, but so far away, and it's its own culture that's like it's basically a foreign field. But we need missionaries. We need preachers here to fill these places. And so we want you to pray, fervently pray about, could you do that? Like, could that be part of your journey? And to consider thoroughly the possibility of coming to work in Alaska and to help this special time in history where the churches are united together to be lights to the world. I have so much more I want to share and talk about. Contact us on Facebook or email if you have any questions about the work up there or about coming up to check this out. And I can't express enough thankfulness to this place and to what God has done through this place in so many ways, not just in my life, but it gives me great comfort to know that God is growing his kingdom throughout the whole world, not just in Alaska, and to know that that Christ is more involved and more active than I even understand. It is a very comforting knowledge that the growth of his kingdom is not dependent on my performance. He's working through all of you and working throughout his people throughout the whole world, and that gives me great, great joy. This last year in Alaska has been super fruitful, and we're excited to go back up there in a few days, and we're praying very fervently that some of you may join us up there in the future. So please keep Alaska in your prayers. Keep Annie and I in your prayers as well. And let's go ahead and, I believe, stand and sing or have an announcement. No. I'm going to walk down, and then you're going to do what you need to do.